Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to report on our most recent report. We just released this a couple of weeks ago that provides estimates of intimate partner violence in the United States. So looking at women first, similar to previous presenters, we present on lifetime and 12-month prevalence estimates, with on this slide the lifetime estimates being in the darker color. And so if we look at our summary measure, which is contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner, about 34% of women reported that in their lifetime. About 20% reported contact sexual violence. A little over 22% reported physical violence, and about 12% reported stalking by an intimate partner. And then we also have a measure in which we combine our summary measure with whether someone has experienced an IPV-related impact. And about 30% of women have experienced one of those forms of violence and an IPV-related impact in their lifetime. And just to kind of spell that out a little bit more, we measured impacts including being fearful, being concerned for your safety, any post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, any injuries, a need for medical care, whether someone filed a police report, whether someone was missing at least one day of work or school, whether somebody had a need for housing services, victim advocate services, legal services, or contacted a crisis hotline. So we don't break those out in this initial report, but we do plan to publish some fact sheets that will look at the prevalence of IPV with each of those individual impacts. We'll be looking for that to come out in the coming months. And so then if we're looking at 12-month prevalence of our summary measure, about 5% of women have experienced contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking in the past 12 months. 3% experienced contact sexual violence, 1.4% experienced physical violence, 2.4% experienced stalking by an intimate partner, and then IPV in the past 12 months with an IPV-related impact, about 3.4% of women experienced that as well. So this slide just presents a lifetime prevalence of different subtypes of IPV. We have some reportable 12-month estimates, but we're not presenting those here. So if we break down the different types of contact sexual violence, about 8.6% of women have experienced rape by an intimate partner, 14.2% experienced sexual coercion by an intimate partner, and 8.6% experience unwanted sexual contact. And then we also break out physical violence into whether someone was slapped, pushed, or shoved, or experienced any form of severe physical violence. About 20.5% of women experienced being slapped, pushed, or shoved in their lifetime by an intimate partner, and about 18% experienced any form of severe physical violence. And so to kind of break that out, severe physical violence includes being hit with a fist or something hard, being kicked, being hurt by having your hair pulled, being slammed against something, having been hurt by choking or suffocation, being beaten, being burned on purpose, or having a knife or a gun used on them. And so then if we look at the lifetime prevalence estimates by state, the lifetime prevalence for women of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking ranged from 21% to 48.1%, and we were able to report those estimates in all states. And then if we look at that summary measure along with IPV-related impact, that ranged from 18.6% to 46.6%.
Matt, can you just clarify what the term with impact means, IPV-related impact?
Sure. It was that fairly long list of impacts I was mentioning before. So that includes being fearful, being concerned for safety, any PTSD symptoms, experiencing an injury, need for medical care, filed a police report, missed at least one day of work or school, and then a range of services, whether they needed a range of services. So they experienced at least one of those. And like I said, we'll break all those out in a future fact sheet that we're planning to publish on our webpage.
Perfect.
All right. So then we also examined psychological aggression by an intimate partner, and about 30% of women in the United States experienced some form of psychological aggression in their lifetime. And then breaking that out into the two different forms we measured, 20% experienced expressive aggression and 27% experienced coercive control. We were able to report state-level estimates for psychological aggression and found that it ranged from 19.7% to 50.2% in among the states and in DC. All right, so turning to men, same thing except in green, the dark green are lifetime estimates. The lighter color is 12-month estimates. About 17% of men reported in their lifetime they had experienced contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking in their lifetime. 4.4% reported contact sexual violence. About 14% experienced physical violence. 4% experienced stalking. And then 13% experienced any of those forms of violence along with one of those IPV-related impacts at some point in their lifetime. And so then looking at 12-month estimates, 2.3% experienced that summary measure containing all the forms of violence we measured. There was not enough cases to be able to report contact sexual violence by itself for men lifetime. I'm sorry, the part that's not reportable is 12-month. Then about 0.8% experienced physical violence within the past 12 months. 1.4% experienced stalking in the past 12 months, and about 1.4% experienced one of those forms of violence along with an IPV-related impact in the past 12 months. So breaking down the different subtypes of contact sexual violence and physical violence, rape by an intimate partner, a lifetime was not reportable for men. There weren't enough cases to report. An estimate, 0.8% experienced made to penetrate by an intimate partner, about 3% experienced sexual coercion by an intimate partner, and about 1.6% experienced unwanted sexual contact. And then for physical violence, 12.4% experienced being slapped, pushed, or shoved during their lifetime, and 8.6% experienced one of the forms I listed before of severe physical violence by an intimate partner. So then looking at the state level estimates for men, the lifetime prevalence of contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking ranged from 12.8% to 29.7%. And for that measure, we had reportable estimates for 25 states. And then if we look at that composite intimate partner violence measure, along with having experienced an IPV-related impact, that ranged from 11.1% to 20.8%. And we were able to report that in 9 states total. So turning to the lifetime prevalence of psychological aggression by men, about 22% experienced any form of psychological aggression by an intimate partner, 13% experienced expressive aggression, and about 20% experienced coercive control by an intimate partner. And then looking at it at the state level, it ranged from about 16% to about 34%, and we were able to report that in a total of 43 states. So some points to consider as we kind of wrap up. First, in general, the estimates were a little bit lower than what we found in 2016 and 2017, which we believe is due to the major changes in methodology. And as was mentioned before, we discourage comparing of the estimates because of those changes. We did have a higher response rate than in the previous administration of NISVS, and our cooperation rate showed that over half of those contacted and were eligible agreed to participate. There are some limitations to consider when examining the data. First, the NISVS estimates do not include certain subgroups of the population, such as those that experience homelessness and those who are institutionalized in some way. And the survey was offered only in English and Spanish. However, these estimates should really be viewed as underestimates, partly because of some of those groups that we weren't able to capture. Those tend to be folks that have unstable housing, and so maybe at increased risk of experiencing intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and stalking, as well as we think that there still may be underreporting and discomfort disclosing, even though we take a lot of precautions in trying to make sure that respondents are safe and they feel comfortable answering these questions and do it in an anonymous way. There's still, I'm sure, some discomfort in answering the questions. And then there's also a lot of likelihood of recall bias, particularly for events that happened long ago in someone's life. And then, as mentioned before, we discourage comparison from year to year, or from administration to administration because of changes in methodology. So one thing to just draw your attention to as we talk about preventing these forms of violence, CDC has developed the prevention resources for action for each of these forms of violence. These were previously known as technical packages, and these are really designed to help states and communities take advantage of the best available evidence to prevent these forms of violence, and all of these are available on our website.